get started in 10 seconds. So everyone's ready. I want to thank everybody for joining the Texas House Democratic Caucus today for a press conference to discuss our commitment to supporting our public schools across the state, especially now in this moment where our public schools have really stepped up to be the center of a lot of the needs for our communities. We've heard the concerns of Texas educators, from students and families, and because we've listened and we've heard, we are calling on the governor and the Texas Education Agency to extend hold harmless to ensure that our public schools remain fully funded at pre-pandemic levels throughout the rest of the year. Additionally, we are also calling for the cancellation of this year's STAAR test, which we recently found out must be taken in person this spring. I'd like to ask that anyone attending use the Zoom Q&A feature. If you have any questions, we will address them after the prepared remarks. Now, to continue with the conversation and talk more fully about funding our schools, I'd happily like to introduce my good friend and colleague, Representative John Busey. Representative Busey.
Thank you, Representative. I want to talk about funding in our schools. Our public schools should not be losing funding simply because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Last summer, the Texas Education Agency enacted a hold harmless provision to ensure schools wouldn't lose funding based on attendance at a time when attendance is volatile. Now that provision has expired, and neither the governor nor the Texas Education Agency has decided whether they will continue that provision. Our schools stand to lose millions of dollars should we not extend hold harmless. Our teachers and staff are under enough pressure trying to navigate how to educate during a pandemic. Our students, families, teachers, and school staff deserve to know the state has their backs and will continue our commitment to provide all the resources they need to succeed in these uncertain times. The governor has the power to instruct TEA to extend hold harmless. Should he choose not to do that, Texas House Democrats are committed to fully funding our public schools when the time comes to address the budget in the House. We will also continue putting pressure on the Texas Education Agency so they are aware how important this issue is to millions across Texas. We need to fully fund our public schools. The bills don't go away. The need is there, and we can get this done. We need the governor to instruct TEA to make it happen. At this point, I want to introduce our great colleague, Representative Alma Allen, to discuss another issue facing our schools.
Thank you, Representative Busey. This is an important issue. It is vital for our children, it's vital for our teachers, and it's vital for our community. And that is the test taking of the Texas STAAR tests in the spring. Now, last week, the Texas Education Agency announced that they would require that the students of the state of Texas take the STAAR test in person. Let me emphasize in person. We cannot ask our schools to take the burden of scheduling in-person STAARs for all of the students across the state of Texas. That's 5 million children and thousands of teachers and employees. We're in the middle of a life-threatening pandemic. We also cannot ask our teachers or our school personnel, students, and families to put themselves at risk for an unnecessary test. Let me emphasize unnecessary. Spending millions of dollars on the STAAR testing is not giving us any more information that we don't already have, things that we don't already know. And as an educator, I could tell you before we even take the test. We know that many of our students are struggling. We know that not all students across the state of Texas got a quality education equally. We know that our school districts are trying their best with the resources that we have given them. Keep in mind that we are not fully funding our schools. It is irresponsible to waste the millions of dollars on tests that even in a normal school year has been shown not to give an accurate picture of how our schools are performing. We're calling on our governor and the Texas Education Agency to cancel the STAAR test this year. Cancel the STAAR test this year. Last year, our state sought waiver to cancel the STAAR test. due to the impact of the COVID-19 on our schools, we must do the same this spring. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Representative Gonzalez to wrap things up. Representative Gonzalez?
Thank you, Dr. Allen, and thank you, Representative Busey, for your words and demonstrating our commitment as a caucus to public education. I want to thank everyone who is here able to join us today, especially my colleagues who really stand behind public education, and even the ones that aren't here. I am opening the floor for questions. As a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A box. I will read them out loud for our my colleagues to answer. So the first question comes from Kimberly. Are you concerned about the tens of thousands of children that have not returned to school this year or enrolled? Do you see a mechanism, option / incentive for ISDs to find those kids if we hold ISDs harmless? Anybody of my colleagues want to take the first question?
Yes, this is Alma Allen. Yes, we are concerned about them. That's why we're asking for them to not be required to take the test, and particularly in person. You're asking 5 million children to return to a space. We're asking teachers, I don't know how many thousands of teachers to return to spaces that they have not been in. From those persons who will be coming in, 5 million children will be coming from homes where we're bringing, each one will bring in their own tests and their own ideas and their own, I guess you say, if they're exposed to COVID, they'll be bringing that in from every home and from every. Keep in mind, not only that, we have bus drivers, we have clerks, we have attendance clerks, we have counselors, we have everything. We are asking for a lot from our students, only to find out that they did not do well. We know what the test will reveal. Yes, we are concerned about our students.
Any other members? I'll jump in really quickly to answer your question as well. I agree with Dr. Allen completely. Everybody on this Zoom and every member of the Democratic Caucus cares about our young people, specifically ones that are the most vulnerable. So if a student hasn't enrolled in school, we are concerned with that. But just because we want to hold schools harmless doesn't mean we aren't concerned, right? So I think that there are two different issues. If a school continues to need the resources even to identify or find that student. And so we need to be able to do both, find and identify students who are missing, are not enrolled, and also hold our schools harmless so they have the resources to do that work. And so we're committed to both of those issues.
Yes.
The second question, or now there's lots of questions. Okay, here we go, everyone. If Texas swayed the STAAR this spring, how would Texas comply with federal ESSA requirements, ESSA requirements? Are you expecting the Biden administration to waive test requirements? Because it hasn't been heard, although it could happen. Anybody want to answer this question? Representative Busey?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we are. I mean, what we need is we need the governor to instruct TA and also to put in the request, as other states have done, to the federal government. I think it'll get done, especially when the federal government hears that they're requiring in-person testing in the middle of a pandemic. That's outrageous. So I know that the priority right now of the Biden administration is to stop the spread of COVID-19. This is going against that priority. So yes, we need the governor to act, we need TA to act, and we need to put in the request of the Biden administration, and I do expect them to grant it. Other states have already put in that request.
Yes.
Representative Hernandez?
I mean, the request was made last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic reasons, and we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So we know, if anything, our families, our students, our teacher staff are, in a more difficult position now as we continue to navigate through this pandemic. So yes, we are requesting for another waiver of the STAAR test.
Thank you. Anybody else? We have 4 more questions still. I'll continue with the questions. Is there any context as to why the STAAR is required in person?
I don't know the rationale behind that. I really, and I've been thinking about why we would have it in person. I don't know that that they're thinking maybe somebody else would be doing the tests for them if they were in their home setting, or that it would not be a true picture of what has been taught or not taught in this last year. I don't know the rationale. I just know I would like to hear the rationale from whoever came up with that idea, particularly since teachers have not been a priority on getting the vaccine yet. And the students are certainly not a priority for getting the vaccine. So we are really sending them back into a very toxic environment. And I don't know a rationale why it has to be in person.
And I mean, if I may add, we've seen during this pandemic other, testing, for example, the bar examination that has been done virtually. We saw that phenomenal story of the woman that went into labor in the middle of her exam and continued her exam after she had delivered and continued the test in the hospital. So we see that other tests are able to be done virtually, and there's no reason to put families, students, teachers, staff at risk to require this in-person examination for the STAAR.
Thank you, Dr. Allen and Representative Hernandez. Representative Goodwin, I know you led an effort to get more members organized and signing a letter regarding teacher vaccination. There's a question from the press. When do you expect teachers who do not fall in the 1A or 1B priority groups to get the COVID-19 vaccine? Because you led on this issue, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. Well, hopefully soon. I know the CDC has actually added teachers to phase 1B. Texas hasn't yet made that determination, but I think they're hoping to get more people 65 and older in phase 1B vaccinated before we add more categories to eliminate any bottlenecks that we might have. But I feel like with the increased numbers of vaccines that we're getting now, that should happen soon.
Thank you, Rep. Goodwin. The next question from Nikki Griswold. To TEA Commissioner Morath says students need to take the STAAR test so the state can assess how much learning loss has happened during the pandemic. Do you see this as a valid reason to have STAAR testing this year? What would be a better alternative?
You would really like to have a diagnostic test if you were going to take a test, and something that measures what they have not learned doing the same. But let me say at this point, what they have not learned is always not their fault that they haven't learned it. Texas has a real problem with broadband. Texas has a problem with funding education. So when the pandemic hit, the kids did not have laptops. They didn't have hotspots. They didn't have teachers who for some teachers did not know at the time how to teach their kids using those methods. And so it's really not the children's fault. We may be measuring how much of it is our fault that they have not been had exposure to these things if they don't have broadband. Now, I heard the governor say the other night that broadband was a priority for him this year, but now that the kids are being punished for it, they're the ones who are being required to say, I have learned, but they didn't have the equipment to do it. And so we need to look at that too before we just cause our children to take the brunt, the cost for what they did not learn.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Representative Busey, I know you had a comment as well.
Well, I fully agree with what Dr. Allen just said. And a diagnostic, if we're going to require standardized testing, let's do it in a way that becomes a tool for our teachers. But yes, the question was, what is the alternative? The best alternative is to trust our administrators and our teachers to do their job, which is to assess their students and educate their students and work with them. And when we're cutting funding and we're doing tests that don't help give them the tool, we're not benefiting or supporting the people on our front line to educate our children. So the best assessment is to throw this out altogether and let the teachers and administrators do their jobs.
Thank you, Representative Busey. I'll add that this last year has been traumatic for students and for teachers. So we also know that the test hasn't really told us a lot about academic achievement for students even before COVID. So using this as the barometer to tell us whether or not learning loss has happened, if you think about the ways in which the test hasn't really demonstrated that, and on top of trauma, it's just not the appropriate tool. We need to know about learning loss, of course. We know already that 70% of our Texas kids, that's 4 million kids, already experiencing severe learning loss. We know these numbers. We need to continue to investigate that, but we need to use the proper tools in order to create effective solutions. I'm going to give 2 more questions before we have to close today. What sort of feeling are you getting from other members of the legislature, specifically members from the Republican Party, that public education will be treated in the same ways that we're talking about? Anybody having talks with our colleagues they want to share?
I know there is a Republican representative who's filed legislation to eliminate STAAR testing, so I would imagine they could get on board with eliminating it for this year.
I think the House has demonstrated a bipartisan commitment to public education, like Representative Goodwin said. We saw that work through House Bill 3. I think we're all committed to making sure that we are keeping our students safe and healthy, but also funding. And so while we don't always agree, I think when it comes to public education, we have similar goals. And we're eager to work together. Okay, one more question. Erica wants to know about the TELPAS test and the status of ELL's academic measurements during the pandemic. Does anybody want to expand on English language learners and COVID? Did I freeze? No. Okay. I'll go. So here's what we do know. One of the things I've noticed in my district is a lot of our kids are learning from home and using technology. A lot of that technology is only in English. We know that there has been a significant learning gap for English language learners because of the lack of resources and tools available to the students and specifically their families. We have a lot of work to do when it comes to our marginalized and vulnerable populations, kids with disabilities, English language learners, kids who are in generational poverty. And that for the Democratic Caucus is a high priority. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody who joined us today, the Representative Hernandez, Dr. Allen, Representative Bowers, Representative Goodwin, Representative John Busey, and Representative Art Fierro, as well as the members of our caucus who weren't able to join us here. Public education has been at the forefront of the work that we do as a House Democratic Caucus. We will continue to fight for our students, our teachers, and our local public schools. We have always done that, and we're committed to that. So thank you to everybody, and we look forward to the work ahead. Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.